Hello, I am Claudia Morales from the Music Division, and I'm here with my colleague David Plyler. We are excited to welcome to our digital stage 2017 Grammy Award winner cellist Sue Bailey. Known for his successful career filled with appearances as soloist and recitalists across the globe, Sue is also a committed educator. He holds multiple educational roles, including the artistic director of El Paso Pro Musica in Texas, the Northwest Back Festival in Washington, Classical Inside Out series at Mesa Arts Center in Arizona, the Sitka Summer Music Festival series and cello seminar in Alaska, and director of Center for the Arts Entrepreneurship and professor of cello at the University of Texas at El Paso. Sul is here to talk to us about his virtual concert streaming on November 19th in all the library platforms. Dear Sul, welcome to the library. We are delighted to have you here.
I am thrilled to be there. I've been wanting to be in the Washington, D.C. area for several years now. And because of, I usually play there once a year. And I visit my entire family during that time period. But because of our situation, I've not been able to. But yet I get to come soon. And I'm very much looking forward to being on the ground with my feet there. But virtually, I'll take it.
So for the ones who don't know, Sul is local. He is born and raised in Northern Virginia. And let's take one step back. I always love to go back to the origins, to the family, to the roots. So you grew up in a family of musicians. Both your parents are musicians. Your sister, she's a violinist. And you start playing the cello very soon, early age. You went right ahead into a youth orchestra, YOPW Youth Orchestras of Prince William. And then you moved into AYPO. So please tell us about how these young exposures to playing in a large ensemble were instrumental to your career and to your upbringing as a musician.
You just opened a huge treasure trove of memories. I really took for granted, I think, as everybody did growing up in Northern Virginia, the Washington, D.C. area in the 1970s, I took for granted how accessible the arts were. We had the National Symphony at the Kennedy Center, and our resident conductor / cellist was Mstislav Rostropovich. In Woodbridge, Virginia, growing up, which was 23 miles south of D.C., we had orchestras from the Prince William Symphony to the Manassas Symphony to the Prince George's Symphony to the Alexandria Symphony to the Arlington Symphony. Every city going up towards every 5 miles, 6 miles had its own regional orchestra. The arts were on a silver platter for us. The opportunities. My parents, yes, are musicians. And I felt very lucky with that. My mom is not only an accomplished pianist, but a piano teacher, as well as the organist at our church. My father has his doctorate in music education and taught band in Prince William County schools, as well as became an administrator. My sister, who's a few years older, a violinist, has degrees from the Manhattan School of Music, University of Oregon, Peabody Conservatory for violin performance and orchestral performance. She is now the music teacher at Thomas Jefferson High School in Fairfax County. In the 70s, we all started the Suzuki method. That was the big thing back then, where they could take young kids. In my case, and in most of my friends' cases, we were 4 or 5 or 6 years old. And we sat in groups full of 10 or 12 people. And in some cases at Wolf Trap, there were hundreds of kids playing. In fact, President Carter's daughter was in my full-on class at Wolf Trap. And of course, as you said, the youth symphonies, that was where we all kind of gathered to play together. It started with the youth orchestras of Prince William, which was close to my home. And as we started to expand as a family to play more and more close to Washington, D.C., and my teachers were in the National Symphony, and so were my sisters, we met the conductor Luis Haza, who was my sister's violin teacher. And he was conductor of what was then called the Northern Virginia Youth Symphony. So I played for him when I was in 5th grade. My sister was already in the Northern Virginia Youth Symphony, which is the AYPO now. And he let me in 6th grade to that orchestra. So I sat in the back of the orchestra as this little guy, and got to play with the big kids. These orchestras, this community, the arts have inspired me to the life that I have now. They are my community. Everywhere I went as a performer growing up and trying to be a performer, I wished for communities to have that feeling that the arts build in us as human beings. And what I mean by that is, I found great comfort and confidence as a young person, being able to express myself freely through kind of the universal language of music. Because I got that confidence to do that, and it felt so safe, I began translating that into my own human being communication, using words and human expression that we all have. And it changed me as a human being. It gave me confidence to have great friendships and great connections, and to exchange information with people, which was, we don't have to talk about this now, which was part of the problem with the pandemic, because I think that we all didn't realize how much we need human contact and expression to share. So long story shorter, I grew up, and then I went to the Northern Virginia Symphony, and that became my community. All my friends were in it. We played at the Kennedy Center. We played all over the place, but I learned the repertoire. I learned to work with others, kind of like a sports team, what they say that the sports brings to young people. You have a voice, but it's a voice in a larger picture. You know your place. And I didn't know until I left in 1990. I went to Peabody Conservatory, how lucky I was to live in that area, that the arts were so celebrated, and that really did define my entire childhood. So I have taken that forward, and everywhere I go with these festivals, most cellists, if they're lucky enough to have a performing career when they're young, and I was lucky enough to have a platform starting at about 19, 18, when they hit about 40 years old, they start to realize that the repertoire itself is rather finite, unlike the violin repertoire or the piano repertoire. A lot of cellists then either become more fixated on teaching to give back to the next generation, or they become conductors, because they want a larger picture, and they want to start to give back so the next generation can take the torch next. In my particular case, I found a love for replicating this childhood, the Washington, D.C. area, in other communities, and taking the huge responsibility to fulfill that phrase, the grass is greener where you water it. And hence the reason why I am now affiliated with 5 music festivals, from Alaska to Washington State to Arizona to Texas. I know these communities, and this is my 20th year in El Paso. So they know me, they trust me, and I'm their friend, and I am kind of like the Pied Piper. So when I come to town with my friends, they automatically trust me, and I'm consistently there with me and my friends, not only on the stages, but in the schools, providing education and consistency to try to describe and break the walls of this kind of high-end art form of classical music, and make it very, very accessible. And so that's where I am at this moment. And it all started in Northern Virginia, in the Washington, D.C. area. Unbeknownst to me, it just happened to work out that way. And I am so proud to be part of that area, and to be part of the Prince William County Youth Symphony, as well as the Northern Virginia Youth Symphony, the AYPO, and of course to have had, because of my parents, the best teachers available. And that is one of the things that's also a key thing that I tell young people, is that, your passion really depends on your teacher in a lot of ways. Your teacher can destroy you, but can also make you find that passion. And the key is to find that perfect storm of an educator that inspires you to find what is meaningful to you. And I had that.
No, that's fascinating. I'm so glad that this tradition continues, both in your work and also in our area. So that's nice to hear. For this particular program, you put together quite a program, and with a wide range of works. And I'm hoping we could talk a little bit about it. But I understand first that this was the first live performance that you gave since the pandemic began. Is that correct? The performance that we're going to hear?
Again, I have such deep relationships with so many organizations from my 30-something years of performing that I was very busy during the pandemic. I was going around with the face shield on and the mask, and I was like this on airplanes, and I would get off the plane and we'd be tested with hazmat suits, and I would be quarantined. But you are correct. What I would be led into would be an evacuated hall, very distanced, no audience, a lot of cameras. And it was a very zombie land type situation. I much preferred that than playing for a camera, meaning I much preferred, everyone was playing in their living rooms and everyone was doing these kinds of things, but there was something about a concert hall where you feel like you can release it in a bigger way that does inspire. And this recital for you was the first time that I walked on stage with people actually in the hall, and there were a fair amount of people there. This was, of course, I think right at the beginning of vaccinations, I think. But people were very separated, but very enthusiastic. And there was still a lot of fear, I have to tell you. I mean, at least now we know that barring some mishap, if we follow the rules, we are safe, as we know from just having done it. But I didn't know this at the time. So we were worried. I mean, I kept wondering about whether to take the mask off on stage or to leave it on. And how far is the first audience member going to be from me? You also, being on camera, you want to represent safety. So I didn't want to walk on stage without my mask. And I believe what I did, I'm trying to remember, I believe I walked on and then took it off as I got there into my little area. But I tried to put together a program with my friend Brian Wallach, whom I met in South Africa in 2017, who subsequently lives in the United States now, in Colorado. A program that would be celebratory, diverse, also just what I do in all of my programs, I try to remember where I came from. And meaning I always implant pieces that are not just thematic, but remind me of who brought me to the table. And so I tried to tell those stories, and I can certainly tell you them again, but that's the program as well.
Well, you start with this, the Mendelssohn variations, that is really a wonderful piece that he wrote when he was quite young, I think 20 or so. And does this particular piece have you have a connection to this one? Is this one of those pieces where it just kind of felt right to open with this?
Well, it's kind of what I like about this piece is that it's innocent. He did write it when he was writing. I believe he was 17 or something around that. And he wrote it for a family soiree. He used to, the Mendelssohn families had these gatherings on Sundays, and he and his sister and family members would all play together and produce these pieces. And, it reminds me of my family and kind of where I came from. But I also like to, sometimes I like to shock and awe an audience with the first piece. But in this particular case, I wanted a familiar hug of family. I like it because it's comfortable and casual, but yet virtuosic and evolving. It starts in the low bass. The melody of it starts in the piano, but the cello has the role of what it actually was built to be, which is a supporting role. And then it slowly starts to weave together. It's also an underplayed piece, as is a lot of Mendelssohn's early works. And what the audience should know about Mendelssohn is that, especially using the octet, which I believe he wrote when he was 16, in so many ways, he was far greater earlier than Mozart. And these early works are spectacular, and they're very thoughtful and way beyond his years as the age on paper. I remember when my sons, I have two sons, would say they're bored at 15 or 16. I'd put on something by Mendelssohn and be like, you got to get busy here. There's lots for you to be doing other than saying you're bored. So that's the reason why I started with the Mendelssohn. It was kind of a comfortable way back for the audience to get to know the sounds, live sounds. It's a short piece. It's about 9 minutes long. And it also is an equal piece. because it's a duo, and Brian's a wonderful pianist, and I wanted to showcase him as well, and have us kind of all be holding hands together.
That's a really good point you make about early Mendelssohn with the we had all the string symphonies and things like that he was producing as a young teen, and then the even greater point is that he would be potentially playing this with I think his brother Paul was a cellist, or but in any case, that was probably the situation in which he found himself. So it's nice to have this sort of intimate, yet still kind of precocious work to open the program.
Yeah, he always wrote for people that were close to him and special to him. Everything was special to him. It was going back to, I'd like to use this quote, and please bear with me when I throw all these quotes out, but one of my mentors is named Paul Rosenthal, and he was the founder of the Sitka Music Festival, a wonderful violinist who studied with Jascha Heifetz. And one day I asked him, having heard all the greats in history in the 1900s, Heifetz, Milstein, Oistrakh, Rubinstein, et cetera, I asked him who his favorite performers were. And he said, oh, that's very easy, my friends. And that kind of cleared things up for me because, and so to play this concert with my friend, Brian Wallach, to play music that was built for friendships and family was very meaningful to me. Every program I put together is very, it's not just a toss together. It has a lot of meaning because it takes a lot of work to get to concerts. People don't know that. To travel with a cello is a nightmare. To travel these days is a nightmare. To be holed up in your hotel room where they don't clean the room because of the pandemic, and you're sitting there waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting for your 1 hour, hour and a half to play, dislocated from the audience. It's a lot. And so my point for telling you that is that the payoff is that moment on stage, is to see how powerful music is and how it does change lives. And it starts with the lives on the stage. If we're inspired by each other and the music, then the audience gets to take that home with them, we hope.
Well, that's a really nice sentiment. And, the direction that you take with the program is quite unique, because the very next piece that you do is the Debussy Sonata, which to my ear is one of the more avant-garde pieces on this program in terms of it's a late Debussy, composed in 1915, one of the last of a series of sonatas that he had intended to write, but couldn't quite finish. He finished the violin sonata afterwards, but it really kind of represents the end of an era as opposed to the end of a life, as opposed to the beginning of one that we see with Mendelssohn. And I'm wondering if you could just say a bit about this piece and your relationship to the Debussy Sonata. We'd love to hear it.
Yeah, this piece, my goal was to show the pouring out of emotion gesturally. He wrote this piece, and there was a rumor going around when he wrote this piece that he wrote it kind of a storyline with Pierrot in mind as a mime. This is a story that I've read many places. It was negated by Debussy himself. He didn't want to write a themed something that was attached, but it basically starts off in the park where the piano begins, and Pierrot, the mime, is under a tree, rather feeling the repercussions of a late night before, let's just put it that way. And the moment the cello staggers in and stands up to try to get the bearing, which is the Pierrot, he finally gets his footing, and you'll see the cello goes around and around trying to find that. And then all of a sudden, he looks across the park and sees a beautiful woman. And he goes, oh, my heart. And that's the first theme. Da-da-dum, da-da-dum, ba-da-dum. And the first movement is all about him trying to get clarity on how to approach this passion and love that has just stolen his heart. But it's all done with these amazing gestures on the cello. And they're literally like these 4-bar, 3-bar phrases with these railroad tracks in them with pauses where he's going back and forth, but it's all so impressionistic. If you were to pair this with a painting of in the impressionistic time period, you would see it's literally the soundtrack to one of those paintings, a Monet or whatnot. And the second movement, it's a very short piece as well. I wanted to have these little pieces. So the Mendelssohn's about 10 minutes long. The Debussy in its 3 movements is about 10 minutes long. The second movement, he realizes what he can do to possibly get this beautiful woman's attention. And he pulls out his mandolin and starts to play it as the serenade, which is the second movement. And again, you have these different effects that we didn't have in the Mendelssohn, where you have a ponticello and you have the filigree. And then you have, of course, the pizzicato of playing like you would play serenading on a guitar. And the second movement is that whole serenade. And then basically the piece winds up in the finale movement, the last 4 minutes, 3 minutes of the piece, of him kind of coming to clarity and realizing, however the story observer would like it to be, whether he succeeds or just gets on with his day at that point. But I wanted to show a very different, Mendelssohn is a thick, beautiful, lush, sonorous production of sounds. Debussy, a lot of different effects, a lot of different gestures. And I wanted the juxtaposition of those two side by side, same length piece, but to also show a very different kind of style. Most people, and I'm not even sure when they print the program for these recitals with Debussy on them, they print that story. I generally tell the story a little bit on stage so people can look forward to it. But it's a marvelous piece. And it was part of his cycle, of his collection of pieces at the end that he didn't finish that cycle. We're very lucky that he incorporated a cello sonata for us. And it's one of the very few sonatas that's so brief that it's very insertable into any program without occupying too much space.
So moving into the program, you also have the Faust piece, Capriccio for cello and piano. It's a very fun piece. And I really enjoyed the story behind the piece. Can you please share that with your audience?
Sure. This is one of the pieces that being in the DC area and being that one of my cello teachers in high school was the great late Stephen Cates, who was my professor at Peabody. He taught me this piece as a freshman in college. And he said that this was one of the pieces that Gregor Piatigorsky asked him to take to the 1966 Tchaikovsky competition to represent America. In 1966, the tensions between Russia and the United States was not ideal. Americans were not necessarily going to be championed or celebrated, and the Russians wanted to win everything, of course. And this piece, what I love about it is I love to tell this story, is that this piece was one of the assisting pieces that helped him win the top prize, which in that case was the silver medal for an American that year. And it's very cowboy-like. It's Americana. It's the Wild West. The funny part of it is that, so he told me all these stories about it that Piatigorsky told him about, riding a horse and galloping and hitting the horse with the whips like this and shooting the guns off in the Wild West. And it's really hoedown like Copland. It was written in the 1930s ish. But I actually got to meet Lukas Foss, and I got to perform with Lukas Foss. And I told him this story, and he said, that is absolutely not true. And he said, I wrote this piece while visiting China. I just wrote it because I wanted to write it. I wasn't thinking about cowboys and riding horses. And I said, well, maybe you were missing home. He goes, I don't know. I'm glad you like it. Tell whatever story you want. I don't care. And so it's very fun. It was fun. And it's very rare to actually meet the people who create these pieces. Imagine, we invent all these things that Mozart might have been thinking, or Brahms. Imagine asking them and then be like, no, that is not. I
love that.
And
I love that. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Yeah, I know. He was sitting in a hotel and just by himself, and he's like, I'm just going to write a piece, and maybe I'll write for cello. And he wrote this. It's about a 6-minute piece, but to me, it represents where I came from. It represents kind of the panache and the virtuosity and just the fun that these pieces can have. And Stephen Cates and the Piatigorsky school was all about that. It was about personality, and it was about just, people come to concerts to be entertained. They don't come to be educated per se. Yes, I think the best education comes when you're least expecting it. And so, I don't lecture my audiences. I tell them fun stories about the behind the scenes and what they should be looking for, because they don't know what I know or these stories behind the scenes. But if you didn't know the story, you might think, because when I'm playing the galloping thing, my body moves like I'm riding a horse, and there's a lot of bow tapping and left hand pizzicato at the same time, which sounds like I'm hitting the straps on my own leg or the horse's side or whatever. But I wanted to go from Mendelssohn, which is just a beautiful hello, I am so happy to be here and I'm very grateful, to, hey, check out the sounds that a cello can make in a very unique masterpiece by Claude Debussy, to, oh, and we can still have a lot of fun without you knowing anything. And being that we're in the DC area, I can showcase where I came from, and so proud of being from Peabody in Washington, DC, to dedicated to Stephen Cates.
That's a fun, lovely story, Sul. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And as you said, sometimes we just make all these stories and heavy load ideas behind pieces that really nothing of that is true. And we don't know anything about that anyway.
I tell kids all the time, I said, I think the music is the soundtrack to our lives. And every time I play a piece, it's amazing, especially when I play a piece that I know so well, and I can have my mind somewhere else while I'm playing. And I'm not worried about the technical aspects or whatnot. It does tell a different story each time. And the better the piece, the more I'm loose to flow freely. That's something that is so special. And I think it's what makes music incredibly indescribable, is that it just makes us feel something different each time we hear the same piece over and over. It leads us down a different path. And again, especially the great ones, they tell the story of life. And that life is yours at that moment. And who knows what people are bringing into the concert hall at any given moment when they're listening.
I thought I should just add on here that we actually have the Lukas Foss collection of his papers at the Library of Congress. Oh, wow. And we have this manuscript, or at least part of it. I know that we have the orchestral version for cello and orchestra that he did after the cello and piano version. So for anybody who's interested to come check it out and check out other works by Lukas Foss, you can definitely do that at the library. So I just double check that while we're.
I'd also like if you can find out, I'd love to know if it was dedicated to Piatigorsky, because I know he edited it and it's his edition, and he was heavily involved in a lot of things during that time period. But I'd be curious to see if Lukas Foss wrote it for him in particular, because he did champion this piece more than anyone else during that time.
I will have to check into that, but we will definitely, definitely. I don't quite have that at hand, but definitely.
Add to my stories later.
Yeah, definitely. We'll check it out. We'll let you know. So you round out this program with kind of a massive monumental piece, the Rachmaninoff Cello Sonata, which it's kind of hard for me to believe. We often think of Rachmaninoff as a composer who comes after Debussy, but he really wrote the bulk of his music before Debussy's death, before 1916. And the cello sonata dates, I think, from 1901, around thereabouts, so over a dozen years before Debussy's cello sonata. There's a lot that you can say about this piece, of course, and I want to hear exactly what you have to say, but I imagine that one of the challenges is the piano part is a massive one as well. It's really like a little concerto along for both players. And so I'm just wondering how and you do it so well with Brian, what sort of was that a challenge to get the balance right, or is this one of those pieces that is now so standard that that you just there's a way that everybody knows how to play it and do it justice?
Great questions and great insight. First of all, we are so lucky as cellists. I can't believe that almost all the great composers, excluding Mozart, wrote something for our instrument. Brahms wrote 2 beautiful sonatas. Beethoven wrote 5 piano and cello sonatas. Even Stravinsky wrote the Suite Italienne for us because of Piatigorsky. Rachmaninoff, oh my gosh, the fact that we get to play with that piano part, and that he makes it, he really does use exactly what the cello does so well to its most the great advantage that it has, and it's just to be a singer and to sing that lush line and have that. I spent a lot of time in Alaska, and when I'm on float planes going over right over the spruce trees in Sitka and Juneau and all of that, it's amazing how, with all of those trees and all of the things that are on the ground flying right over it, makes it seem so simple, the landscape. And what I'm saying about that is that Rachmaninoff, with his large hands, was known to put a tremendous amount of virtuosity, a lot of trees, in his landscape writing. So it's an absolute, and again, going back to what I was saying about a cellist position or one's position in life, you have to know your place. Whenever I play a Brahms sonata, I always think Brahms is sitting at the piano. Whenever I play a Beethoven sonata, he wrote on the cover of the music, sonatas for piano and cello, because he was playing the piano part. And Rachmaninoff would have been the pianist, and he would have been the show, and I would have been his partner in his show. And the job that I have is to make the most gorgeous sounds possible. And in this particular case, a lot of times the evolution of the cello was to replicate and duplicate the left hand of the piano, or to add texture that the cello can do to a piano part. But he does separate with all of those notes in the piano. He has the cello being the float plane or the eagle, flying over this massive amount of what I would call a symphonic piano part. And it's a masterpiece. And what I love, what you were saying about it's so different than Debussy, and this is, I'll just say it. You don't have to edit it out. But this is what I don't like about the internet now. I don't like the fact that we can share so much information that we have the melting pot has become the globe in a way. So what I'm saying is that when he wrote this, it was so Russian music. When Debussy wrote it, it was so French music and the German school. And then you've got, the cultures, the Spanish school. You could tell immediately where they were from. You can tell Rachmaninoff immediately. His language is so clear based on his life, and it's encapsulated, and we were so lucky. And I'm just celebrating the past, saying that time period, it was such a clear masterpiece and such a clear vehicle that was so obviously Rachmaninoff, that it's such a joy to sit down and live through that, and also ride the coattails of the spectacular pianist, which is Brian Wallach in this case. I don't play this piece very much because you need to have a very specific bond with the pianist, because there's a lot of dependency on them. They have to be able to whisk you along, and you have to be pulled along, and you have to be able to spend the phrases and not detract from the motor below. A lot of cellists, and I don't mean this as a negative, but a lot of cellists take time during the phrasing of this piece that makes no sense with the piano part. I try, and you'll hear it, I try to stay out of the way of the piano part and just be along with that ride, knowing that Rachmaninoff is just leading me, and the melodies spin into the next melody. And it's about the long arc, which the perfect example of a performer who played for the horizon was Mstislav Rostropovich. His interpretations are long, they're not micromanaged. So anyway, it's a thrill to play this, and I thought it would be a perfect way to just feel good, sit back, and just have lush sounds in my first concert back with people in the audience.
Thank you so much for that.
So, Sul, you just mentioned before the hustle, what it takes to travel, and to travel with your instrument, which is not easy to travel with your cello. Can you tell us about your instrument? Our audience loves to know the behind the scenes stories about the instrument. I know what I know about your instrument is that it is from 1693, the Matteo Gofflier cello, formerly owned by Misha Schneider of the Budapest String Quartet. And the Budapest String Quartet actually played at the Library of Congress in the past. So that's interesting for us to know.
Yes, I am the luckiest person on earth in my mind to have met my soulmate instrument when I was 25, 26 years old. This is a Matteo Gofriller cello built in Venice, Italy in 1693. It's the first cello that I had ever played and had played that replicates what I think a cello sounds like in my mind's eye. I had the great fortune living in New York City for almost a decade to play all the great makers' instruments, Stradivarius, Guarneri, Guadagnini, Montagnana, and they were all wonderful. If I had all the money in the world, I might have a selection of different instruments for different pieces. Stradivarius works really well for Schubert and Vivaldi and things that kind of are champagne and celebratory. Boccherini, but this cello is so magnificently broad. It's earthy, it's earth-based, and playing Brahms and Mendelssohn and Rachmaninoff, it is spectacular, and it's I believe it's my 25th anniversary with the instrument. And as you were saying, it was the foundation of the great Budapest String Quartet, which Misha Schneider was the cellist, and that quartet was spectacular in the history of string quartet playing, because they were significant. They were the first quartet that I've read and heard that were full-time string quartet playing. They didn't have other jobs that they did, playing symphonies and played string quartet on the side. That was the first formed professional string quartet that's all they did. And they were in residence at the Library of Congress for I think at least 2 or 3 decades, maybe 3 decades. And this instrument was in the hall for those 3 decades. The only issue is that your beautiful Library of Congress has a quartet of Stradivariuses. So I would say probably most of the time, and I heard a rumor that may or may not be true, but obviously we were requested and required to play the quartet of Stradivariuses every time they played their concerts. Occasionally, though, they would come in at the last minute, like hours before the concert, and they'd been on a tour, and they would use their own instruments just because the time period to get accustomed with an instrument is sometimes needed. So it brings me great pleasure to know that it was probably played once or twice at the Library of Congress, along with, of course, the beautiful Stradivariuses in the quartet that is in residence there. But yeah, it's a great instrument. It's got a rosette carved into the fingerboard, which is like a medallion, and it's got a little. It looks like a flower, and it's one of 2 in the world that has that under the fingerboard. I'm not sure in this video if you're going to be able to see it. If I hold the cello sideways, it's right under the fingerboard, so it's right up here, kind of like an Iron Man symbol. But no, that's the cello, and it's got an incredibly unique voice. It's very clear, but very textural, and also the low tones are, I think, the reason why Misha Schneider kept it his entire life. A lot of people switch instruments around as they can throughout their life based on different things. I couldn't imagine. I couldn't imagine playing another cello or having another voice. So I can now see why Misha kept it until he stopped playing. And I hope I have as long a life with that cello as he did.
That's wonderful to know. And for our audience, at least I can tell you that during my time, when we have string quartets coming to play the Stradivari, they usually come one day before, at least, to spend time with the instrument. Maybe back in the time, I'm sure that things happen, and maybe that was the case. Speaking of you, going back to the early times in your younger years, young years, playing the cello, I heard the story about one of your hands. That something happened with one of your hands, and I found that fascinating. Could you please share that with our audience?
The story has actually evolved since I started telling the story a while ago. The story is very quickly, is that I decided that I wanted to be a cellist at age 12. A man came up to me and said that if someone can find what they love to do and make that what they do, they'll never work a day in their life. And at 12 years old, I was a very, very small kid. And I began practicing a lot. I mean, like 4 or 5 hours a day. So during my growth spurt, which was from 12 to 16, 17, I was stretching my hands out a lot. And I had a large instrument and the only reason I had a full-size instrument at so young is because I begged my father to get me one so I could have a hard cello case like my friends. I didn't like the soft little bag cello cases that little kids had. I wanted to be like an adult. So during that time period, the bow, if you hold the bow, you can see that the hand is tilted like this. So the hand will slowly start to adjust. So you can see everybody's body adjusts to what they're doing, whether it's sitting at a computer or throwing a football or a basketball holding onto the ball all day long. But so my right hand is used to carrying the cello case as well as holding this bow. So that's my right hand. And if you notice right through here, it's kind of squared off, and the fingers are regular length, I guess, and the palm is what it is, and my thumb goes to about right there if I stretch it out.
Mm-hmm.
My left hand, from stretching it, looks considerably bigger. Let's see if I can show you.
Mm-hmm. I can see.
I can't take my thumb but you can see, you can see that the palm here goes up. It's because of my stretching on the instrument like this and playing. And so over the course of the time period, it just changed my body, and I can really stretch it out too. I mean, but what's interesting about that is, so I was playing in Australia about 10 years ago, and I made some quip to the audience about the large cello in it, but it was easy to play because I have a large hand. I showed my hand. This man came back to me after the concert, and his name was Dr. Hand. He was a hand doctor. And he took an X-ray, or he outlined my hand. He took all these photos, and he said, "This is impossible. Fingers are. This is impossible." So he went back to his laboratory, Dr. Hand, and he wrote me a huge letter, very lengthy, about what is possible and what is not possible. And he basically told me what I have done to my hand is basically stretched out this portion considerably. I've made it more flexible, as pianists can do when they play the lower octaves on the piano. And that with that, it raised the second finger here up. And so all of and the breadth. So that portion is what grew. And then these kind of became leaner of the constant moving back and forth and the stretching. So you asked for my story. That's my story. I actually have people come up to me a lot of times. Oh my God, it's so embarrassing. At a the concert, and they'll bring a Sharpie and they'll bring their music, and they'll open the music and have me outline my hand in their music.
How fun is that?
Like in kindergarten when you made a turkey with the that's what they would do, because they want to put their hand there to see if they actually have a big hand too. The fact is that it doesn't really matter your hand size to play the cello. You need an appropriate cello size. My cello, if you have a smaller cello, you can have a smaller hand. It doesn't really matter. And Stradivarius made the B pattern Strad, which is a smaller cello. And when I play it, I feel like I'm playing a little child's instrument. It's so narrow and it's so cute to be a Stradivarius compared to my beast of an instrument. But it all worked out that the size of my hand met the love of my life, this cello, and it all worked out so far.
So we're also very excited to have you going back to AYPO for a master class. I'm very excited about that. As you said, the pandemic really took a hit on different music programs in schools, youth orchestras. I have my own son, he struggled during the pandemic to keep engaged with his instrument. He plays trumpet, and he plays piano too. But the trumpet was very difficult because it's a group instrument, and when you don't have that, it's very difficult. So I'm very excited to have you going back to AYPO and to work with the kids there. And when we talk about this, what would you say? What recommendation? What would you say to an emerging musician who is thinking about going into music as a profession? What would you say to them?
That's a great question. My answer changes daily, so I'm going to be very careful.
Mm-hmm.
I ask this every day. I'll just start off by saying it's the greatest profession, or it's the greatest feeling to be in music. The word profession, as is the word work, means finances. It means, what you do to pay your bills. It's difficult sometimes to take your passion and to force that into being how you pay your bills. And because it becomes, you take something that you hold so high and you take something that's absolutely necessary and you combine them, it makes a conflict of emotions. I don't know if I'm describing this clear enough. So generally speaking, when I am talking to young people about music or their instruments, I try to describe how music is so much more broad than they think, and the life in music, and the way of expressing and the tools that music gives us open doors to being leaders of companies, to being educators, in addition to being performers, in addition to lots of other things. So to have music in your life, is the ultimate blessing. And to have it part of your daily life really does add a joy and a humanity that, as you said, I think a lot of people went back to basics during the pandemic. And the basics are maybe the craft of their instrument versus the communication of their instrument. So practicing scales and getting all the tools ready for the pieces. But as I said, I think the pandemic made us realize that musicians need to be multifaceted. Because obviously no one would have ever thought that a performing career could be negated so quickly, whether it be playing in an orchestra or a chamber group or solo, or that society could shut down so quickly. And again, like cello is the same way, in a way like your son's instrument, that I play with others. The repertoire for playing the cello by itself is not significant. The Bach cello suites, they're Britten, and there's some Rager and some caprices, but it's not like a piano that they spend their life playing the greatest music by themselves. So it was very difficult on my two sons as well. My sister, who is an orchestral teacher at a high school, was really worried about her students because they weren't together, and it's not the same over the video. I even collaborated forcibly with some people, playing with them like this, where we would play with an earplug in or earpiece in, and it was fine. I got it, and I saw that it was necessary in some ways, but it's not the same as getting together and sitting beside your friends and sharing music. So I'll just repeat again, your question is that, and what I do talk to people about, just how having music in your life is the ultimate. How does it translate into assisting your life to having a healthy life, meaning as a profession or work or these kinds of things, a lifestyle? How does it affect your family? How does it affect these things? This is what I talk to students all the time about, because it's important, because as you grow up, you want to have something in your life that continues to stay positive and that can help you move forward and create stability for you and your family.
Mm-hmm. So moving into the future, what's next? What's in the pipeline for you?
Well, obviously, during the pandemic, one of my huge priorities was to ensure the future of the festivals that I'm a part of.
Mhm.
So I'm working heavily with them to do projects for our donor bases and our communities and our patrons and our subscribers to keep connected. And we did a lot of virtual things, which was great because I learned about the power of using this equipment. And I also learned that through my community engagement, I was able to reach a lot more people at one time than going into a school and playing just 300 people at a time. In fact, one of the concerts that I gave in a particular region, in one morning, I reached 9,000 young people. 9,000. A lot of times I set a goal to try to reach 10,000 people in one given season, in any given community. So what's next for me? The concerts are coming back. I am being very careful now, and I guess I'm going on record to say this. I have enjoyed being home. For the first 35 years of playing, I was never home. I just was on the road about 300 and something days a year, and that was what I knew. But I really enjoyed being home for that time period, and the routine of it, and waking up in my own surrounding, my safe place, and practicing and seeing my friends and my family on the daily. So I'm turning 50 this year. So
wonderful! Congratulations.
Well, thanks. But in April. But one of my 50th birthday presents to myself is to take better care of myself, as well as taking care of others. I have made a mission to try to take care of others for 30 years and bring music to them. And I would just run around and do everything possible to make a difference. And during the pandemic, it made me realize a little bit more aware of self-care. Mm-hmm. And I find now that when I play, my playing is different. And it's more, I am awake and I am present, and I am, and it's the space around the concerts that's making the difference, not just playing a concert every day somewhere. And so I've got, this fall is, I'm adding some new repertoire to my arsenal. I'm adding some solo repertoire, some Spanish music, as well as some new concertos. And then the spring is rather heavy, and I've got to be careful because as I said, I don't want to just fall into old habits. Mm-hmm. And so I read this wonderful article about the best way to go through a portal, which is what a pandemic is, into a new chapter, is to take as little through that doorway as you once did possible. Meaning, don't bring your bad habits or your habits through. Start anew, start afresh. And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to make up a whole new set of rules. And I started saying no to people instead of just taking the concerts. I have no excuse for no. I just want to be home. So another time. And what I'm enjoying very much, having had a 30-something year career already, they then ask if I can come the following season. And that's important to me because I do want to go at some point, but I don't want to be gone for 3 weeks at a time anymore. So that's kind of what's happening. I made a couple of recordings that are all coming out this year. The Bach cello suites, that was one of my projects during the pandemic, was to revisit those. And they just came out, and I've got a couple of more in the pipeline that'll come out in the new year. But more importantly, I have and this kind of dates me a little bit, but for my 50th birthday, this record company named Octave Records is releasing my Bach cello suites on vinyl.
Wow!
Record. I love that. I asked them to release it on 8-track tape. And they said, let's start with the record first. I want the real. I want something that's totally my childhood. So they'll release it in probably February on record. So I'll have my first vinyl record to hear. And what I love about vinyl is that when I play, and I put the bow to the string, I can hear the drag of the bow on the string. It's the textural drag. And I love the needle on the record because it's the same.
The sound.
It's the same. And
Yeah.
so I don't hear that normally in a regular CD. In fact, the record I made is on Super Audio CD, so you actually do hear it. But the record, I can't wait to hear the drag of the needle.
Oh, I can wait. I approve. I 100% approve.
Well,
I love that.
I'll make sure you have a copy.
Oh, please. I love that. I love that. That's a great project. And Sul, your words resonate with me so much. And I've been hearing that more and more. What the pandemic gave us is this awareness of self-awareness, having time for ourselves, our family, what really matters to our life. And I think that is just wonderful. And thank you for sharing that and for saying that. I think we all need to hear that more and more. So I want to thank you so much for your time. I'm wishing you so much success, so much love, and so much music in your life. Thank you. And we cannot wait. We cannot wait for your virtual concerts. And for the ones hearing and seeing us from home, please tune in on November 19 for Sul Bailey and his concert on the Library of Congress. So see you soon.
Thank you.